Hi there, everyone. I want to make sure that you can see me and that you can hear me. And if you can, go ahead and let me know in the chat where everyone has been introducing themselves. Welcome to today's webinar. It's exciting to see where everybody is coming from. All right, can folks hear me? Yes, perfect. Okay, great. I want to thank you all for your patience. We are having a little bit of trouble connecting one of our speakers for today, and so we are doing the best we can to get her connected, but I did want to go ahead and kick us off. We are talking today about transparent design in higher education, teaching, and leadership, a guide to implementing the transparency framework institution-wide to improve learning and retention. And I'm so excited to be talking with our authors today. We have Suzanne and Allison with us, and we are trying to connect Mary Ann. So I will continue to do that as we get kicked off today. But I want to go ahead and just get us started with learning a little bit about what this transparent design is, and kind of the shorthand that we're going to be using is TILT. If you want to learn a little bit more about this book, you're going to have a button at the bottom of your screen that will say learn more about the TILT book, and you can go and learn more about it on the Stylus website. I'm Dr. Katie Linder, another Stylus author and host of our webinar series. We also have an Ask a Question feature in the Crowdcast space. And if you have a question for our authors, please feel free to use it. And that will allow me to timestamp your question in today's video. We already have a couple questions that have come in via email. And I have, of course, if you've been to the series before, tons of questions for our authors, but we welcome engagement from the audience as well. So I am going to have Allison and Suzanne kick us off with just a little bit of an introduction to what TILT is. And while they're doing that, I'm going to go see if I can track down Mary Ann. So Allison or Suzanne, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves and then tell us a little bit about the concept.
Sure, I'll jump in and get us started. And if you see Allison and I smirking, we think it's a little bit funny that Mary Ann is not here to join us, because this project really represents her life's work and is her baby. And it is our privilege to join her in the Transparency Project. So you'll hear us use some words interchangeably: TILT, transparency, transparent assignment design. They all go together. We like them so much, we even made it a verb, and we say tilting. So you'll hear us say that from time to time. But the origin of TILT, I think, goes back, as far as 2008 or perhaps even earlier, when Mary Ann began asking a question that you've probably thought about too. And it's the idea of, if you could change one thing about your teaching that would best improve your students' learning experiences, what would that single change be? And as Mary Ann asked this question to different audiences at Harvard, at the University of Chicago, at different schools that she would go and visit, you can imagine what faculty members and academics said. They said, we don't know. We need to think about that more. So that began an investigation from Mary Ann's part that evolved into the first TILT higher education survey, that continued with AAC&U, that was a funded endeavor with the TIG Foundation, winnowing down this idea of what's one single change that you would make that would help you best improve your students' learning experiences. And what came to the forefront was the idea of transparent assignment design. So this is the origin of TILT in 1 minute.
Good job, Suzanne.
There you go. How's that?
Excellent. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a breakdown of some of the different key elements that are involved in TILT for people who may want kind of a really practical breakdown of what does this look like?
Absolutely. Allison, you want to jump in, and then I'll tag with you.
So the basic framework for transparency is really simple. And I think that was the idea behind it, is what is the smallest change, the simplest change that instructors could make to have the largest impact in the classroom. And the basic framework is purpose, task, and criteria. So in terms of assignment design, purpose. What's the goal of this assignment? Why are you assigning it? What are the things that students are going to learn by completing this assignment? Task is exactly what it sounds like. What are the things the students are going to need to do to succeed in this assignment, right? What are the tasks they need to complete? What are the skills they need to be able to demonstrate to achieve success? And then criteria. How are students going to be evaluated on those tasks that they've completed? And one thing that Marianne really recommends is also providing students with examples of that work, so that, and especially annotated examples, so that students can see what successful assignments look like. And those could be previous student assignments, or they could even better be real world examples that can add to that relevance of the assignment. So purpose, task, criteria, it can be applied to almost anything.
Okay, thanks to you both. Oh, we may have our colleague here with us. Mary Ann, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much.
Okay, so people were saying, oh no, we're going to miss seeing Mary Ann. So she is here now. We did have to go ahead and kick things off, Mary Ann. So we've gone through a little bit of a description of what TILT is. Is there anything that you might want to add kind of about the origins of this and how it's been involved with your work?
Sure. I think one of the biggest and most satisfying findings for us was the degree to which this is an equitable teaching practice. Our initial research with the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and then our later retention study on University of Nevada, Las Vegas students, the most diverse student population in the nation, according to U.S. News and World Reports. Those two studies showed us that all of the students that we looked at benefited from this new transparent approach of clarifying purposes, tasks, and criteria before students start doing their academic work. And what we noticed was that while all students benefited to a certain degree that was statistically significant, the underserved students benefited to an even greater degree. So the first generation students, low income students, ethnically underrepresented students, they had even greater gains in terms of their level of confidence, their sense of belonging in college, and their recognition of their own development of skills, their metacognitive awareness. According to other researchers like Walton and Cohn in their 2011 Science magazine, or Hausman and Ye, we know that confidence, belonging, and awareness of skill development are predictors of student success. And to see those rise to such a great degree for all the students we looked at, but especially the underserved students, that was a really satisfying finding from our work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's hear a little bit about, and you kind of got into this a little bit, Mary Ann, but I know, Allison, you have some ideas about kind of some of the specific benefits of utilizing the TILT framework in the classroom. Can you talk about some of those? I just unmuted you, Allison. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Transparent assignment design in particular offers a lot of benefits, not only for students, but also instructors, we have found. For students, as Mary Ann has already suggested, it offers a wealth of benefits. It obviously offers greater clarity about expectations and can help create a greater sense of relevance and purpose in terms of assignment design and the assignments they are completing. And like Mary Ann said, as the research has shown, it helps improve student confidence, sense of belonging, self-awareness of their skills, and can help improve student performance in general, which is, I think, what all instructors ideally want, and thus can become an equalizing factor in the classroom for all students, regardless of background. Something that was really exciting that we also discovered was how it helps instructors kind of become better teachers in general. Just by going through this process of taking a single assignment and revising it using the transparency framework, this process encourages them to reflect on and ideally clarify, and sometimes ultimately even rethink their own instructional goals and the guidelines that they're providing to students along the way. It kind of forces instructors to take on the student perspective. And in doing so, they can begin to identify a lot of the faulty assumptions that they're often making when it comes to what their students already know and what they need to know in order to succeed in their classes, and help them right any potential miscommunications that they may be having with students, or fill any learning gaps that they didn't even know existed. And something else that we found is that a lot of instructors that we have talked to who have undergone the revision process using the transparency framework do it with one assignment and then have this kind of epiphany, like, oh my gosh, I have to do this with every single assignment now, no matter what it takes, because it's that transformative, which I think is really amazing. And something that we offer in the book are a lot of details about what faculty and students have experienced and how they changed the work that they do as a result of going through this process.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm always really interested in origin stories of books and where these things come out of. And you've talked a little bit about this, but Suzanne, I'm wondering if you can share if there are any specific experiences that led you to work on this book. And if others want to jump in too, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we have a fun one. You know, Allison and I have been Mary Ann's fangirls for a long time. We've known her for a long time and admired her work, and participated with her in the pod network. And, you know, anyone who knows Mary Ann probably associates transparency and the TILT project with Mary Ann, because as I said when I started, it's her life's work. So we've been following this, and we thought to ourselves, hey, we really should think about this at our own institution at Texas Tech University. And so Allison and I were very aware of the research and what Mary Ann was finding. And we thought, could we replicate this at our institution? And so we did a sneaky thing. We started a faculty learning community around the idea of transparent assignment design. I say sneaky because we thought, well, Mary Ann's doing this transparency thing. She's probably doing it with some new faculty members. Can she do it with some old faculty members who are known for their teaching? And by old, I mean experienced. You know, so we called 12 of our favorites from our campus who had won teaching awards, who had been frequent flyers at our center, who were known for good teaching, and invited them to join us for a summer. And I say that it's sneaky because, you know, we were kind of like skeptical, like, can we make this work here? Also sneaky in the idea of, we have these faculty members that we really admire, but maybe we haven't seen them for a while at our own center. They've become busy in other things. So let's see if we can bring them back here, because we like them and we want to be involved with them. It was pretty fascinating to us. We sent out this email, and I mean, in under 24 hours, we had almost unanimous, absolutely, I'd love to try this. This is interesting. So 11 of the 12 said yes, right away. And we jumped in and we did exactly what Mary Ann has talked about doing, a small change. We challenged them and said, we even took it smaller. And we said, would you just change one assignment that you've taught with in the past, and would you make it a transparent assignment design? And can we see what happens? So we did that over a summer. And these wonderful, esteemed colleagues of ours found that they had improvements to make in their own assignments. These are people well regarded for their teaching. We can all improve. And that's what we found right away. So we had a blast with this faculty learning community. They were able to replicate the same kind of results that Mary Ann has seen nationally, and we were hooked. And we told Mary Ann about that. We jumped in with the research with her. Our faculty colleagues did that as well. And I think, you know, as Allison just said, people get involved with transparent assignment design and get kind of hooked to the idea. We did too, as educational developers. So I think that's our origin story for how we began partnering with Mary Ann and thinking, I think our first idea was we should do a conference. And then we thought, ooh, no, we don't want to do a conference. Let's do a book. That's a more interesting long-term project to document this work in a different way that complements the research that Mary Ann's already done.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead. Do you want to add something, Mary Ann?
Just in terms of origin story, I think that the origin story of the TILT project kind of mirrors my origin story in this profession of educational development. I was an art history teacher, and I was teaching both daytime college students and night school students. And I was thinking really hard about the value of the content that I was teaching for these different types of students. So some of them were going to go on and become maybe the future art historians of the world, and others were already in a full career. You know, I remember a graduate seminar I was teaching in a night school where there were master's candidates they included a banker and a retired priest and a lounge singer performer and a security guard. I think there was a plumber. And I was thinking about, like, what is the value for these folks of learning about Michelangelo, and in a way that's not preparing them to be art historians, because they already are something that is valuable to them. And so how can this be useful to them? And we began to talk explicitly about that, like about their learning gains and what they were looking for. And we did experiments together, right? And kind of initial surveys. And, that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was kind of the beginning of the project. And I was leading a seminar of instructors at the Bach Center for Teaching and Learning at Harvard University. And we coined the term transparency as a way of describing what it was we were trying to do by pulling back the curtain and showing students our rationale for how and why we were choosing to lead them through particular learning experiences. And after that, I think the benefits that we all saw and the teachers saw who tried it were great, but we needed research to encourage others around the country to give this a try. I think most people are willing to try something that's small, that looks like it has a big impact, but we needed really to demonstrate with some actual research that the impact was statistically significant and real. And that's where all the research came into play. And so now we have data and we offer that to say, hey, look, this seems like it really works. Give it a try. It's a small tweak, small tilt, if you will, that can have a large impact on student success.
So we've already had some requests in the chat for some citations that I said I could send out some possible ones with the replay email. But of course, as you all probably know, it's included in the book. So if you really want the in-depth view of this research, I would encourage you to check out the book, Transparent Design in Higher Education, Teaching and Leadership. And again, that link is down at the bottom of your screen. So we are getting some questions from the audience already. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over to some of those. One of the questions is about how you're defining assignment. Are there activities that are too small, like in-class activities, to use the template, or too big, like exams? Is that something that you all can address?
Yes. So I'm going to have maybe a different answer from my esteemed colleagues. But so my answer is I use it everywhere on everything from small to large all the time. And I think that I've noticed with faculty that they'll use this framework in a limited way to describe the purposes, tasks, and criteria for an in-class activity that takes 10 minutes, right? They'll maybe spend 30 seconds giving it the purpose, task, criteria overview. Whereas with longer tasks, like larger projects, there might be a page of instructions around purposes, tasks, and criteria. And then as Suzanne and Allison can tell you, the framework has been used for tasks or assignments that whole departments give to each other, or that a Center for Teaching and Learning might envision for itself.
You know, one of my favorite stories from a faculty colleague here at Texas Tech comes from a flute professor. And Allison, you can jump in and help me fill this out. For one thing, she's a lovely colleague. Her name is Lisa Garner-Santa, and she joined us in one of the chapters in this book to talk about her experience. And when you ask about, what makes an assignment, I think Lisa had a particularly interesting situation where she taught a studio course. So she's not going to do in her case, she didn't want to do transparent assignment design for each student in her studio. It would be ridiculous. Instead, she wrote a general assignment for all students in her studio. And this is how it went. This is where it gets really interesting. She wanted the students to recognize the urgency of mastering their scales. I think, you know, anyone, non-musical or not, can understand that, right? That scales would be foundational for these students. But what she experienced was that students would come to perform the scales for her, and perhaps they would have not perfected them, you know, and not recognized the significance. So they would come and, you know, miss 2 or 3 notes in a scale and be devastated then when they didn't receive a high grade, and even in shock. And when she applied the transparency framework and talked about, why is this important? Why is this a skill that you need to master? What is the task that you have to do? How is the criteria set up that I'll assess your performance on these scales? And applied that in a broad sense, she really saw her course shift, and students begin to own this assignment. She even talks about how they set up study groups on their own and began practicing their scales together. The reason that we love this story in particular is because Lisa would say that once she applied TILT to her scale assignment in a broad sense, as the first semester she ever had without tears in the studio. Students began to realize, this was actually significant and I didn't understand it.
And I would add that I really, like Marianne said, I think that it can be used on a wide range of assignments or activities. You might see it and think, oh, this only is relevant to really large projects that I ask my students to complete, or a writing assignment. But it's really not. We had faculty at our institution, you know, from engineering and kinesiology use it for projects that involve problem solving. It could absolutely be used for an in-class activity. I think it all depends on the instructor's willingness to sit down and really think through those goals and that criteria. And it can be as big or as small as they want it to be.
Awesome. Okay, so we have another question that came in via email asking about the institutional level change when it comes to TILT. And they said, I'd like to hear what internal or external factors influence the chances for institutional change. And I know that this is something that you all are interested in with this model. Who wants to launch in?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again, Katie?
I sure can. So this person said, I'm primarily interested in the institutional level change that can come from TILT. And I'd like to hear what internal or external factors influence the chances for institutional change.
That's a really great question, and it's one that I've been thinking more and more about. In the TILT in the new book, Chapter 8 describes University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the kind of the efforts that we used there to achieve a kind of institutional change, which we measured in terms of retention rates of students and also central investment in creating a faculty development center, both of which we achieved, which was exciting. But I often talk with institutions who are working on student success efforts, and they will invite help in terms of, you know, could someone come talk to us about this, or what are your suggestions about this? And the ones where I find the most success seems to follow are those who have already got some kind of groundswell from the faculty. I think one of the big challenges around institutional change is that faculty don't always feel connected to institutional student success efforts or institutional inclusion goals in the same way that they feel connected every day to the students in their class or to what they're doing in a classroom. And what's nice about the TILT framework is that it can help foster a kind of communication between administrators who are organizing top-down student success efforts around things like, they might implement a new curriculum, or a new core program. They might institute a new aggressive advising policy, or they might target scholarship funds to particular students where they feel like students who belong to this demographic are not achieving the results that we need, and can we target them with specific resources? But that doesn't necessarily involve faculty in a day-to-day way. And this framework can connect faculty and administrators in talking about their large-scale institutional purposes, tasks, and criteria, as well as the small-scale ones that faculty can make every day as a contribution in the way that they're teaching their courses. So I like the framework in that it facilitates that kind of large-scale, small-scale connection and communication between faculty and administration.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions. One person asks, have you surveyed students to learn if they feel less anxious about assignments that have been tilted or that have had tilt applied to them?
So I'll let Allison and Suzanne answer that in a moment, but I know of a project right now. A colleague of mine, Professor Maria Madison at the Heller School at Brandeis, is embarking on a really interesting study that we hope will involve some high school students as well in the city of Waltham. And she's planning to measure their cortisol levels before and after a discussion of an assignment in this way, and compare stress levels of students before and after a tilted conversation about an assignment. So we'll know a little more about that soon. But Suzanne and Allison, do you have any accounts along those lines of measuring students' reactions?
I can jump. Oh, sorry, Allison.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
I can give some anecdotal experience from my first year seminar that I just wrapped up last week. One thing that I've been doing differently, I think, in the past 2 years in teaching this is from the very beginning, introducing my first year students to purpose task criteria framework as an expectation of their own learning, and asking them to shift their mindset and say, this is a difference perhaps between high school and college for you. What should you expect from an assignment? How can you think about an assignment? Even if your professor doesn't teach it this way, how can you go into an assignment and understand why you're doing it, what skills you'll need, what knowledge you'll gain, what you're being asked to do, and how you'll be assessed? And I think what I understand from my students is that I just read their papers, their final papers reflecting on the semester. And this comes up again and again as a theme of, this helped me understand what my faculty member was asking of me. And this made me feel better. I felt like I knew what to do because I knew a different way to think about the assignment.
I like that it gets all students to the kind of same starting line of understanding about an assignment before they have to work on it. And so for the more advanced students, it's a reaffirmation and a recognition that, oh yeah, what I thought was it is actually the point, right? Yeah, I get it. As opposed to those students who might really be benefiting more from not just reassurance, but also a kind of clarification that they didn't have before. And the important thing here is that it's beneficial for all students to recognize and be part of this process in creating the conditions for everyone to begin at the same starting line of understanding. There's a social justice, a kind of equity aspect that all of the students can be contributing to in these conversations around purposes, tasks, and criteria. And we sometimes think that if we work really hard at it as instructors or as team leaders or employers, we could provide the perfectly transparent assignment or task or job. And I don't think we can, which is why we put this framework into the students' hands. And we've created a student version of the framework that invites students to show us their perceptions of the purposes, tasks, and criteria, and to give us an opportunity with their questions to make it clearer to them and more transparent, relevant, accessible to them before they start doing the work.
Okay, so we have even more questions coming in. So one person asks, for most instructors and instructional designers, simply stating the learning objectives for an assignment would be adequate for preparing and motivating learners. TILT seems to suggest that setting up a learning activity or assignment requires more than this. Can you please elaborate on how TILT can enhance conventional instructional design practices? Anyone want to start?
Well, I can talk about an experience that one of the faculty members in our research had. She was actually teaching a graduate level course in literature and was asking her students to complete literary analysis essays. And through the process of revising her assignment, which was very much like the question suggests, where it kind of said, this is what you need to do, these are the objectives, she discovered something that I mentioned earlier, which is this idea of assumptions that she was making about what students knew and didn't know, such as knowing exactly what a literary analysis is in her definition, and how she can convey that to her students. She realized that there was this huge gap in understanding between the two of them. And one thing that a lot of our instructors realized going through this process was the benefit of things like scaffolding and sequencing assignments, and setting multiple deadlines for things that help students with understanding the assignment more deeply, and using time management skills that maybe they hadn't used before, but also spending time in the class going over the assignment with students. So I think her experience shows that it's more than about articulating the learning objectives. It's, I think, really reflecting on what it is we want our students to understand about the assignment and how they can get from point A to point B with success. Because I think anybody who's been a faculty member knows that we probably have certain ideas about our assignments or the things that we're asking our students to do. They make perfect sense to us. And we think our learning objectives are really clear, when in fact, there's a lot more under the surface. And I think the framework of TILT encourages instructors to really dig underneath that surface and help bring students up along with them.
Okay. Suzanne, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you've seen TILT expand from its original classroom-based application. And actually, I'm going to shift that question over to Mary Ann. I think this is an area that you're interested in particularly.
Okay. Yes, I think, I mean, certainly we know from, and Suzanne and Allison can also kind of fill in the details here, but we know that there are many faculty developers around the country who have begun using TILT as a way to frame their own strategic plans in a way, or their own goals for a particular program, their own goals for their whole portfolio of work. I've been working with colleagues also at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, Pat Hutchings and Jillian Kinsey, and they've got a chapter in the book that talks about how the TILT framework might be able to inform larger assessment efforts, not, you know, at an institution, but even beyond institutions, to think about it in that way. We certainly at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, saw many staff supporters of student success using the framework. For example, folks in online education, folks in the library, colleagues in the registrar's office, colleagues in student employment, even work study, like they would use the purpose task criteria framework to write a work study job description that would highlight, these are the skills you're practicing in this job that are actual student learning outcomes for our institution, so that students would even see what they're doing outside of the classroom as contributing to it. It heightens their metacognitive awareness that they're gaining skills in other aspects of their student experience outside the classroom, that are helping them to accumulate and gain learning toward these institutional learning outcomes. Is that kind of what you were getting at in terms of larger contexts? I think my friends here can also comment on larger contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. Allison or Suzanne, do you want to add anything?
I think one thing that we've seen, and you can certainly read more about this in the book, is from systems that adopt TILT across institutions. And, of course, our frame of reference is educational development, since that is the career path for us in various forms. But imagine, if you are working at an institution that has multiple locations and you're each consistently working with your faculty colleagues to implement a TILT emphasis in classroom assignment design, and broader, as Mary Ann said, in thinking about assessment and thinking about resources on campus. I think it's a way of finding shared language across the different sites or within the site itself, that's unique. So I love it. Last week I presented with our Office of Assessment and Planning, and we talked about TILT at the classroom level, and then at the program level, and then thinking broader institutionally. And even just that simple idea of shared language. What is purpose task criteria? How can we rethink it in these different contexts was very empowering to us in different roles across the campus. So that's one thought that I have.
All right, thank you.
Vegas also that people were speaking very different languages based on their professions. So, the Association of American College Registrars had a particular kind of accrediting language with goals, and as did the online learning folks with the Quality Matters rubric, as did librarians who were using DFINC's model of significant learning, as did the NICADA framework that advisors were using. And they had different language to describe many of the same goals, but they weren't communicating in the same language to each other until we began to use that simple purpose task criteria framework. I wanted to maybe loop back, if I could, to an idea about benefits for students, and then we can come right back to this larger context. Part of the framework is the criteria piece, that last piece, which is more than just providing a checklist to students. The words on a checklist or on a rubric might mean something to us that's very different from how students interpret those words. And I think it's really important for students to see examples of real world authentic work in the discipline before they have to produce one, right? I mean, how would a student of mine know how to use a 15th century religious painting of a Madonna and Child from Florence, Italy to support their hypothesis? Or how would a chemistry student know how to use a gaseous reaction to support a hypothesis if they'd never seen that done before? And so the piece of the acting upon this criteria piece means we are encouraging faculty to bring in several real world examples of work that students can then critique using the framework, using the list of criteria for their own upcoming success. And in this way, students begin to own the criteria for their work and see how those criteria are met or exceeded or not even achieved in examples of real world work. And when we expand that out to the larger applications of the framework, I think the same thing is true for employees in a working group. I recently had a conversation with Heller School students in John Chilingerian's course at Brandeis University, talking about how we might apply criteria to the healthcare industry and how you would show real world examples of work in the discipline of healthcare as a way to improve systems in healthcare conglomerates.
Those are really great examples. I'm going to get to a couple more questions from our audience members here. One person asks, here at Boise State, we're discussing TILT with our faculty in a faculty learning community. A faculty implemented some of the principles in her class and then had students report back via an informal survey. Students indicated that they did not care whether their assignments were designed with the features of TILT, having that explicitly stated purpose of the assignment, etc. Do you have any ideas on how to work with students who might feel that way, who maybe don't necessarily see the immediate benefits?
I might show them the data, right? And show them that this is a social justice means of teaching. I think even in those contexts, I don't know whether or not the faculty were bringing in several authentic real world examples of work in the discipline so that students could evaluate those using the criteria for their own upcoming work. I think sometimes the criteria might be presented just as a checklist or a rubric, and students would appreciate seeing what it looks like when those criteria are achieved in the real world. But without knowing more about the particular context, I'm not sure that we could necessarily figure out what it was that the students felt wasn't helping them.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. We have a related question too, and it's kind of being echoed in our chat about rubrics. And someone says rubrics are often a vehicle to transparency, and they're wondering if how these factor into or relate to the TILT framework. So can you talk a little bit about the role of rubrics within this? And then someone else kind of mentioned the criteria using exemplars and applying those criteria. They're also asking about kind of how that relates to the rubric question as well.
So do you want to, Suzanne or Allison, do you have examples?
I would
just, oh, sorry, Allison.
No, it's okay.
I have a brief comment just to say that we absolutely love rubrics and think that they're a great fit for the criteria section. So, you're going to hear us say multiple ideas there where we're talking about real life examples. We're talking about annotated examples. We're talking about rubrics. Those all go together as potential criteria.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say, that I think rubrics and TILT go hand in hand. And I am passionate about good rubrics. Anybody who knows me knows this. And I think absolutely what Suzanne said and what Marianne already said is that it's about articulating how students are going to be evaluated, not just a checklist of, do you have an introduction? Do you have a conclusion? Do you have 3 resources? But these are the real things that we're looking for to make this a successful assignment. And I think the use of exemplars and weighing them against that criteria is absolutely part of the process to, like Marianne said, to help students see the assignment in action, so to speak, and help them figure out how to get there themselves.
Okay, we have another question about the research. Someone says, is there more research on the impact of TILT and instructor perceptions and reducing the expert-novice distance? Wondering about the relationship between the research and that expert-novice piece.
Well,
the expert-novice piece is part of our motivation, I would say. We have a mountain of data that we could analyze to get at that, but so far we've only used the data. We've got 20,000 plus students responses to 44 questions about their learning experiences from countless institutions all over the country, and really different types of institutions too. I would say we are part of the reason that we have this equity crisis in higher education, I think, is that students come to college knowing what works at the novice level across many disciplines. And once they begin to major in something and they need to use new methodologies and new terminology, and new kinds of tools and techniques inside of a discipline, that's where things kind of can begin to fall apart, because the strategies that they used to succeed at the novice level across lots of disciplines don't work anymore. And I think that's something that we could certainly explore inside of our data, but we haven't used it yet. I really admire Randy Bass's work on the expert novice differences. And I think that we may have some data that could shed a little bit of light on this, but we haven't analyzed it in that way yet.
Okay, we have another question from Rebecca, who says, I wonder how you might suggest working with faculty who could see this approach as hand-holding. Faculty who say they want students to figure it out for themselves, so they may not want to show them models. Any advice for faculty who are thinking along these lines?
One thing that I might say, we've heard this before, and that makes sense to us. Sometimes our objective for our students is to ask them to struggle, right? We want them to grapple with material. We don't necessarily want to lay things out. I'm especially thinking about maybe an upper division class or a class in which we really want to challenge our students. And so I would say, if that is what you want your students to do, that's your purpose, then that's a part of your transparent assignment design. If you want your students to struggle with content instead of scaffolding it, laying it out a little bit more, then make that a part of your assignment. Because when we're on the edge of our learning growth there, that's a good thing, right? So if that's your purpose, make it so. Make it explicit.
Okay, we have another question. It seems like there's a natural overlap between well-articulated outcomes, objectives, and PTC aspects. Can you speak to the resonance, overlap, and or distinctions or additions that the TILT-focused approach offers?
The overlap between the TILT framework and what was the very first part of the statement?
There's a natural overlap between well-articulated outcomes objectives and PTC aspects. I'm not sure what PTC means or if you know what that means.
Oh, I am. It's purpose, task, criteria.
Okay, so maybe this is a good question for you, Marianne. So they're asking about the resonance, overlap, or distinctions or additions that TILT-focused approach offers to that particular framework.
Yeah. So I would say, to give like a quick kind of response to that, a well-articulated outcome is one that defines the knowledge part of the purpose, like what knowledge will you gain from doing this work, and the skills part of the purpose. What skills will you practice by doing this work? The clearly articulated outcomes are just that, but they're not necessarily providing advice about the task, how to, or what steps to avoid. And I would say, so in this way, the TILT framework complements really clearly articulated outcomes. And that process of exploring the criteria with the students by looking at real world work examples. Multiple examples, not just one, because if you throw someone just one lifeline, if you throw someone just one example, they'll cling to it too closely. So in some cases, well-articulated outcomes do give you examples, right? Or samples or some suggested steps, but I think largely the purpose part of the framework, the knowledge and skills, that aligns with really well-articulated learning outcomes. And then the task and criteria portions complement those really well-articulated purposes or learning outcomes.
Okay, what an excellent response. So we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone here for asking some amazing questions. We had one more come in at the last minute. Do you all have 1 minute to answer one last question? Okay, so the question is, what is the most common rookie mistake that you've seen as people begin to implement the TILT framework that may be a lesson for the effectiveness of TILT? Or sorry, no, that may lessen the effectiveness. So the rookie mistake may create kind of a less effective experience. What's some of your advice for people who are just starting out?
I actually have a really good example that illustrates this. I work largely with a graduate student population, and I had one particularly eager graduate student from biology who was really excited to redesign one of his big assignments for his microbiology lab. And for him, and I think what is probably a pretty common rookie mistake, is he did too much. He went too far, and he developed this like 3 or 4 page assignment handout for his students. And particularly in the task section, I would describe it as kind of a losing the forest for the trees phenomenon, where he was including steps like go ask your TA for help with finding sources. And the order wasn't exactly right. So I think students were becoming overwhelmed with this tidal wave of information about the task, and they were missing kind of the big picture components. Like, first, I need to identify an organism that I'm going to describe, and then I need to come up with these 3 components, because they were getting lost in all of those details. And to me, I think that was probably the biggest trap that he fell into, and that I think can easily be fallen into by a lot of instructors who might lose focus, if that makes sense.
That's a great example, Allison. Okay, now we really are at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of people's
Can I
time.
add just one?
Go ahead.
Katie. I was just going to say one of the biggest traps, I think, is that instructors feel obligated to deliver transparency as opposed to inviting students to own the framework and use it to parse an assignment and to explain to the professor how to provide transparency.
Okay, thanks for that last little bit. And thanks everyone for joining us in today's webinar and for your patience in putting up with some technical difficulties today. I will be sending out a replay option in the next 24 hours or so. I hope you'll share it with colleagues if you think that they will find it helpful. And of course, I want to thank Suzanne, Allison, and Marianne for being here today and sharing all of their knowledge and wisdom around this topic. You can always find more information about transparent design in higher education teaching and leadership by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen to learn more about the TILT book. Thank you everyone for your contributions to today's webinar, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.